The millionaire finished his meeting much earlier than he expected. Normally, his schedule was always packed, leaving no space to breathe. That day, the last appointment ended ahead of time, and instead of going out for dinner with business partners, he decided to drive straight home. The thought of surprising everyone at the house gave him a quiet smile. Usually, when he came back, the lights were already dim, and the staff had finished their duties. But this time, he would arrive when no one expected him. As his car rolled into the driveway, he felt a sense of calm. The house stood tall and silent, but something about the stillness felt different. He walked inside, expecting the usual greeting of footsteps and voices. Instead, the hall was empty. The air felt heavier than usual, as though it carried something he couldn't yet see. He set his bag down and listened carefully. The sound of his own shoes against the marble echoed through the rooms. No maid appeared with a polite smile. No gentle noise of cleaning or cooking came from the kitchen. Then, faintly, from the far end of the corridor, he caught the sound of soft movement. A chair shifting, a cupboard closing, a quiet whisper. He frowned and moved closer, his steps slower now, careful not to be heard. A part of him wondered if something was wrong. Another thought slipped into his mind: was someone in the house who shouldn't be there? His chest tightened as he followed the sound toward a small, less used corner of the home. The millionaire reached the door of a back room. It wasn't a place he often visited. It was usually where supplies were kept. He leaned slightly and peeked inside. His maid was there, not with a mop or a duster, but bent over a small table. She carefully opened a box and laid out what looked like pieces of bread and leftover food. Her hands moved gently, as if she was arranging something precious. She whispered under her breath, words he couldn't catch, but her tone was soft, almost like a prayer. The sight froze him. His first instinct was confusion. Why was she here, and why wasn't she doing her regular duties? He stepped back slightly, his mind swirling with questions. Was she hiding something? Was she taking food without asking? His chest felt heavy, but instead of storming in, he stood still, his eyes fixed on her movements. Something about the way she worked told him this wasn't for herself. His heart beat faster, sensing that he was about to uncover a truth he had never imagined inside his own house. The millionaire stayed hidden in the hallway, his hand resting lightly against the wall as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The maid's back was turned, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she carried the weight of something heavy. On the table, she placed small pieces of bread, a bowl with rice, and even a few slices of fruit that looked saved from an earlier meal. The millionaire's first thought was still clouded. Was she taking food away without asking? The idea stung him, because he had always trusted her. But then he noticed her hands. They weren't hurried like a thief's. They moved with care. Each piece was wrapped neatly in paper, folded in such a way that it looked almost like a gift. She paused after each package, whispering softly as though she hoped the food would stretch a little further. The millionaire's chest tightened. He had never seen her like this. A sudden sound broke the silence: the creak of a door opening at the far end of the room. Two small figures slipped inside. His breath caught when he realized they were children, their faces thin, their clothes simple and worn. The maid turned quickly, and her face lit up in a way he had never witnessed before. It wasn't the polite smile she wore during work. It was a motherly warmth that softened every line of her tired face. The children ran toward her, hugging her waist tightly. She placed her hand on their heads, as if comforting them. Then she handed them the little packets of food she had prepared. Their eyes widened, shining with a joy that came only from hunger meeting kindness. They sat on the floor without hesitation, opening the parcels carefully, and began to eat as though it was the best meal in the world. The millionaire stood frozen. A wave of guilt rushed through him. All this time, he had walked through his grand house filled with food, servants, and comfort, never once noticing what struggles might hide in the shadows. Here, in his own home, his maid had been quietly gathering leftovers, not for herself, but for these children who clearly depended on her. He pressed his lips together, his heart pounding in his chest. The thought of barging in and demanding answers vanished. Instead, he felt something deeper, an ache he couldn't explain. Watching them, he realized this wasn't theft at all. It was sacrifice, and for the first time in a long while, His eyes began to sting with tears he didn't want to admit were forming. The millionaire stood in the shadows longer than he meant to, unable to turn away. The children's laughter was soft, but it pierced him in a way that no business deal or boardroom could. They weren't laughing because of toys or riches, they were laughing because of a simple meal. Each bite they took felt like a celebration. He realized then how blind he had been to the small acts happening right under his roof. His eyes shifted back to the maid. She didn't eat with them. Instead, she sat quietly, watching the children as if their happiness was enough to fill her own hunger. Every now and then she brushed a crumb from one child's cheek, or adjusted the other's sleeve so they wouldn't look untidy. Her movements were careful, protective, like someone who had carried responsibility far longer than she should have. The millionaire's throat grew tight. A part of him wanted to step forward immediately, to reveal himself and tell her she didn't need to hide anymore. But another part held him back. He wanted to understand first. Who were these children? Why had she never spoken of them? And why did she go to such lengths to keep her actions a secret? As he leaned closer, he caught fragments of her whispering. "Eat slowly. There will be more tomorrow," she said gently, though he could hear the uncertainty in her tone. She was promising something she wasn't sure she could give. The words struck him hard. For a man who had built his empire on certainty, this quiet gamble of love seemed greater than anything he had ever done. The children finished quickly, licking their fingers clean, their small faces glowing with gratitude. One of them pulled a folded piece of paper from their pocket and showed it shyly to the maid. She opened it and smiled proudly. It was a drawing, a clumsy sketch of a woman and two children holding hands. The millionaire saw it from the corner of his eye, and it twisted something deep inside him. He realized these kids weren't just being fed. They were being held together by her love. At that moment, a tear rolled down his cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it quickly, but the truth was clear. His maid wasn't stealing. She was saving lives in silence. And for the first time, the millionaire understood that the wealth he prided himself on meant nothing compared to the quiet wealth of her heart. The millionaire could no longer stay hidden. His heart was pounding too hard, and his eyes were wet with emotions he couldn't control. Slowly, he stepped into the room. The wooden floor creaked under his shoe, and in that instant, the maid froze. The children looked up, startled, their little hands still clutching the food. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The maid's face turned pale. She quickly stood up, her lips trembling, her body tense as if she had been caught committing a crime. "Sir," she whispered, her voice breaking. She lowered her eyes, too afraid to meet his gaze. The children pressed against her skirt, holding on tightly, their eyes wide with fear. For a long moment, the millionaire said nothing. He simply looked at them, the children's fragile frames, the maid's trembling hands. The small table with scraps of food turned into a feast of love. Finally, his voice came out low, heavy with emotion. Why didn't you tell me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head quickly. "I didn't want you to think I was stealing," she said softly. Her words stumbled as she tried to explain. "These children, they have no one else. Their father passed away, and their mother is too ill to work. I couldn't let them starve, sir. I thought if I just saved what I could from the kitchen, maybe I could keep them alive." Her voice broke, and the weight of her honesty filled the room. She wasn't defending herself to escape punishment, she was simply telling the truth. Her eyes finally lifted, shining with tears, bracing for his anger, but the anger never came. The millionaire's chest ached as he listened. Every word struck him deeper, peeling away layers of pride he had built his whole life. He had always thought kindness was something that came with money, with donations and charity written in reports. Yet here was a woman who had nothing, risking everything, quietly giving more than he ever had. The children clung tighter to her, sensing her fear. One of them whispered, "Don't be angry at her." The words, small and shaky, broke whatever wall was left inside the millionaire. His throat tightened, and he blinked hard, but the tears escaped anyway. In that moment, he didn't see her as just his maid. He saw her as a mother, a protector, and a human being who carried a strength greater than his wealth could ever buy. The room stayed silent for a few long seconds. The millionaire stood there, his chest rising and falling. his eyes unable to leave the sight of those children clinging to the maid. He could feel every beat of his heart, heavy with something he hadn't felt in years: shame, regret, but also a strange warmth. Finally, he stepped closer. The maid flinched, pulling the children behind her as if to shield them. But instead of scolding her, the millionaire placed his hand gently on her shoulder. His voice was low, shaky. "You don't have to hide anymore." Her eyes widened, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The children looked up, their faces confused. The millionaire knelt down to their level, his expensive suit brushing against the dusty floor, and smiled through the tears he couldn't hold back. "From now on, you will never have to wonder if there's food tomorrow. You will never have to hide in fear." The children's eyes filled with tears, and one of them hugged him without hesitation. For a man who had spent years surrounded by money, respect, and business partners, this simple embrace shook him to his core. It wasn't about power or wealth, it was about love freely given. He turned back to the maid, whose face was still wet with tears. "Why didn't you trust me to help?" he asked softly. She lowered her head. "Because, sir, people like me don't expect kindness from people like you." Her words cut deeper than any criticism he had ever faced. The millionaire swallowed hard. "Then let me prove you wrong." That night marked a change in his home. The children were given their own room, warm clothes, and a promise of school. The maid, once afraid of losing her job, now stood taller, no longer carrying her burden in silence. And the millionaire himself, a man who once measured his worth in contracts and bank accounts, discovered something new: real wealth wasn't in what he owned, but in the lives he touched. He would never forget the image of those children eating scraps with joy, or the quiet bravery of the maid who risked everything for them. And whenever he thought about that night, his eyes grew wet again, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude, because her hidden act of love had opened his heart in a way nothing else ever could.